It's the 80s Experience on FM 88.5 KSBR with J.J. Buchanan. They are known to the world as one of the best bands to come out of Los Angeles, California during the late 1970s. Lead singer Martha Davis of the Motels. Martha, how are we doing this weekend?
We're doing beautifully. It's a gorgeous day and getting ready to barbecue, like we're supposed to.
Exactly. No, I totally agree. So are you here in L.A.?
No. I live up in Oregon and on a big old farm. I'm a farmer.
Nice.
Yep. It's quite remarkable. There's livestock everywhere. Turkeys are in the driveway. Hopefully not on the car. It's very good.
Very cool. Yeah, you guys have a lot of trees up there. I remember being in Oregon, lots of trees.
They like the trees up here, and the trees like it here as well, because, of course, we have rain for 6 months of the year, so if it gets a little gloomy at wintertime, and wintertime is long, but, I love it. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Now, take me back, Martha. I know there was two different incarnations of the band. There was first one there that started in Berkeley, and then another one began. How did that all come about? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the first band started, which was back in those days, we named ourselves the Warfield Foxes, which I think was a play on words from the Fox Warfield in Oakland. We were all Berkeley kids, and my friend Lisa Brennis she was playing bass at the time, and I had been, I'd played guitar since I was 8, and I started writing songs when I was about 15, but I was I did it for myself and for no one else. But then David Bowie came along, and I got really, really sort of excited about music, because he blended all of my favorite styles, which were very strange and varied. I loved soul music, I loved musicals, I loved all this wacky stuff, and then David Bowie comes along, and he's incorporated the whole thing, and I got very excited about the concept of doing that kind of music. And so Lisa threatened me. She said, "Yeah, you think you want to do a band? Well, I've got one. You want to join?" And I'm like, okay. I was also very scared, very shy, and very, but somehow I mustered up the energy. We had 3 rehearsals, and the first gig was Halloween night in San Francisco at a place called Project Artaud in 1971. So that was the beginning, and once I got on stage and performed, once they got me on stage, which I was running for the door, I think, I was so scared. But once I stepped foot on stage, it was like I became a completely different person, as close to schizophrenic as you can imagine, because shy little girl that couldn't even, call a store to see how late it would be open was all of a sudden crawling around on my knees and staring people in the face, and I was like, what happened? But I was hooked.
And it was on Mother's Day in 1978 that the Motels signed with Capitol Records. And how did that all come about, Martha?
We actually started, when we first moved to Los Angeles, there was no place for an original band to play. You couldn't, there were 2 places, the Starwood and the Whiskey. If you were not signed to a record label, you couldn't play either one of those.
Right.
So how do you get your music out? It was very frustrating. We put together with 2 other bands, the Pop and the Dogs, we put together this thing called Radio Free Hollywood, and just hired, rented the hall, hired a rent-a-cop, got a keg of beer, and sold tickets, and actually did really well. We only lost about $90, and that was mostly because we gave a lot of tickets away to our friends. But soon after that, strangely enough, we started getting invitations to play at the Starwood and the Whiskey, and we were getting very close to, actually, one night a guy from Capitol Records, John Carter, showed up, and the guy at the Starwood said, "Hey, there's a guy from Capitol who wants to talk to you." And I went down all excited, and I think he, he's like, "We really like you guys." I went back to the band and said, "Oh my God, I think we might be getting a record deal." And the drummer said, "Well, I'm quitting." And so, because that's what you do with your first band. So
right.
The guys in the band said, "Well, we have to get a new drummer." And I said, "No, I'm quitting too," because to be perfectly honest, the drummer and I were on sort of one page in terms of what we wanted to do musically, and the other guys were sort of going a different direction. So that was the end of we had already become the Motels. So that was the end of that version of the Motels. And then in 79, I reformed with the help of Jeff Gerard and his brother Marty, Brian Glasscock, and Michael Goodrow, and the new Motels were born, and we played out about 6 months and got signed to Capitol Records. The same guy.
The exact same guy, really? That's
John Carter,
funny.
who produced our first 2 albums as well, and sadly, we lost him last year.
Oh, wow.
Very tragic.
Yeah.
So, That's kind of the summation. A lot of stuff went on in between, but we don't have time for that. Nor do I remember most of it. It was the 80s.
It was the 80s. That's so true. And taken from the self-titled debut album was a great tune called Total Control that got some airplay here in the States. I remember listening to it on K-Rock, and it was a huge single for you guys in Australia. What was that experience like for you personally?
Well, it was very strange because I had no idea. I mean, first of all, you try, I mean, obviously I've been doing this now since 1971 and trying and failing, and my kids looking up at me and say, if you ever get signed, can we get some new socks? You know, it's kind of, it's tough, and you go from that to all of a sudden you're signed, you're making an album in a studio, and then you're on a plane to Europe or to Australia, and it happens so fast. And I had no idea. I mean, I've never been one of those people that, you know, tries to figure out what a market's going to be like before I get there.
Right.
So we go on stage and we're playing our set in Australia, and it's a great audience. And then we go into Total Control, and all of a sudden all the lighters come out and people are singing along, and I'm like, what? It's just very confusing to me.
And then from the second album, Careful, the tune Danger became a big hit here in America, and it was a top 10 hit in France, right?
I didn't know that if it was.
It was.
If you found that out, that's good news. Like I say, I don't really do a lot of due diligence about myself.
and I know right after the Careful album was released to the world, I know it was kind of weird because you guys would go back into the studio and record the Apocalypso album that was never released, and then they made you guys go back into the recording studio and record the new album, All for One. And I know you, Martha, were kind of going through some personal changes and some personal, things during that time. Was that the inspiration for the song Only the Lonely?
Actually, it probably played a lot into it. It was because I never know what the hell I'm writing about. My way of writing has always been, I describe it as spew and edit. Mm-hmm. I basically just get out of my own way, and whatever comes out, comes out. When I wrote Only the Lonely, I remember picking up my guitar, and it was basically sitting there. You know, they just come. I don't, and I try to stay out of their way. I just let them. But at that time, we were experiencing all those things that I described before, such as going to Europe, riding around in limousines, people bringing you roses and champagne, and it's all good and beautiful, except that, you know, I was in a very bad relationship with Tim McGovern, who was the guitar player at the time, which meant we were close all the time. And sometimes that wasn't a good idea. So it's kind of the loneliness of being in this, you know, in the situation where it seems like everything is coming up roses, and in fact, it's not very rosy at all. And the sort of the pretense that you have to put on to soldier forward. I mean, because it is like, I mean, this is my dream come true. You know, it was, you know, it should have been the happiest time of my life.
Right.
But it was kind of, and I must say that I think during the entire time that I had my career, just because of my life prior to the career, I mean, I had lost my parents early and stuff, I don't think I was really firing on all cylinders in terms of, you know, having dealt with all the issues that I needed to deal with. So it was kind of, there was a sadness that went along with the fame and fortune, or whatever that was.
And I remember watching MTV when I was growing up, and the music video for "Take the L" came on the air, and I just remember the opening scene where you were singing through the front cover of the quote unquote True Lover magazine. How was that music video put together? There's got to be a story behind that.
That was the brilliance of Russell McKay, who is an Australian director. I've been really lucky with directors. I've worked with, you know, well, David Fincher for one when he was first starting out, and Russell McKay, who is also a brilliant director. He went on to do a lot of the Duran Duran stuff, and you know, just great guys. And he was a definite, like, that was his whole creation, and he was very, very imaginative and had really great ideas. In fact, when we moved on to we did both that video and Only the Lonely video together. We shot them back to back, and in about, what was it? It was something like 3 days or something, for $60,000, which is unheard of these days. I mean,
wow.
And now it is, because everybody's got their own cameras, but shortly after that, videos started costing $100,000, $200,000, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So much money. So we got both of those videos, which are brilliant videos.
Yes, absolutely, I agree.
And like for Only the Lonely, Russell starts. He's like, so I picture you out in the desert in a giant martini glass, and I'm like, Russell, let's reel it back just a tad here. And then I told him my sort of vision of it, and so we came up with that one together. But the Take the L thing was all Russell, and so good. I mean, both he and David Fincher, like, are such innovators, and the stuff that I got to, I was a lucky girl. That's all.
And I grew up here in Los Angeles, always listened to K-Rock, of course, on a daily, hourly basis when I was growing up. I didn't have toys when I was growing up. I had records and MTV and the radio, so which I'm blessed to have even that.
Yes.
And I remember the tune, the hard-rocking, blistering tune, Mission of Mercy. What is the background on that great tune?
Well, that's just sort of a combination of, like I said, these things are, you experience stuff in life, it goes in your brain, it gets jumbled around, and then it comes out. So there was a few things that were, I think a lot of it was about, there was so much loss in my life, my parents leaving. There was, my nephew was going through some real tough stuff, and his father was kind of a nightmare, and it was just kind of this feeling of, I don't know, like, people have their own agendas, and they'll take off on their own agendas. And I think it's, I myself, just being a musician and doing, taking that road, that was difficult on my kids. It's
right.
Like we all do things that are selfish and narcissistic, and, but I don't know, to really pinpoint an exact thing, there's not an exact story to that. It's sort of symbolic of a lot of, I think more of the emotional loss. I think there was a thing, that had to do with my parents, where my mom and dad, were very unhappy, and then they got divorced, and then she killed herself. And it was kind of like, that mama hasn't been feeling well at all, as that kind of thing.
Right.
So
okay.
Let's just say that life gives you a lot to work with.
The year 1982, those 365 days must have gone by so fast for you, because you guys had two great records back-to-back, two great album releases back-to-back, and on Little Robbers, the song Suddenly Last Summer, I remember reading somewhere where you were on the porch at your home in Berkeley after your parents passed away. You bought a home, and you were sitting there, and you heard the little ice cream truck guy go by, and you heard the jingle on the car, and you were just thinking, summer's pretty much over. Is that kind of how you came up with it?
Well, Suddenly Last Summer's probably could be the strangest song that I've written, in the sense that it took place, it was brewing for years. It must have been, because there was a day when I was in Berkeley, that very thing that you described, hearing the ice cream truck. At the same time I heard the ice cream truck, there was this really chilled wind, like the first autumn wind. And I felt it, and I just went, that's the last time I'm going to hear the ice cream truck this year. It was just like this thought thing that went through my head. Okay, cut to years later, because I didn't write Suddenly Last Summer till in the 80s. So this was I left Berkeley in 75.
Okay.
So this is years later, and 3 o'clock in the morning, I am awakened with this da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da melody in my brain. And, got up and wrote the song, and it is about that thing, but that day listening to the ice cream truck was also symbolic of when something happens to you. And I think with me it was probably when it's the loss of innocence. It's the not being able to go back. It's the summer where you have your first romance, and then everything is different after that. You've entered a different place and time. You can't go back, and yet you can recall it. So that's what happened with that song. That song just stuck around in my brain and then popped out in the middle of the night. I tell you, they're wily, these songs. They're very wily.
And the band's fifth album, the last album for the Motels, was Shock. And how was that? What was the inspiration behind that great album? I always loved the title track, but there's some other great tracks on that album too. What was the inspiration about the Shock album?
The Shock album, I believe, the incident that actually made me that song in particular, one of the guys that had worked on one of the videos, and I don't remember exactly, because at that point, like you said, there was a lot going on, but I think it was a scenic, one of the guys that was painting backdrops or something, and, I try to, I'm friendly with all the crew and stuff and love everybody, and we have a good time. It's like the circus. I mean, you all get together, and for 3 days you go insane together, and then you may never see each other again,
Right.
But this guy was with his wife and tripped on a curb and fell over and tripped and hit his head and was dead.
Oh, my gosh.
And it was like the shock of that was just, and there were some other things that were going on, but I was just thinking about shock, it's just like how this, all of a sudden you can just be, the varying degrees of shock, and how ultimately you can just, I don't know.
Yeah. And it's great, Martha. I mean, I always loved music and the history of music and all that stuff since I was very, very young. My mom used to work with Neil Sedaka in the 70s, and so I was brought up on music, and I love getting you guys on the phone or even here in the studio and just talking about the stories behind the music, because I think music is so very, very powerful. There's always a story behind the music, in my opinion. So
it always is, and like I say, sometimes I can't enunciate what that is, because they're, the stuff goes, the things that we go through on a daily basis, they're like dreams, the songs, a lot of times.
Yes.
They're the learned things that you go through during the day, and then they go through some process and come out in a totally different form sometimes.
Right. And Martha, I just got chills when you said that, because I totally agree with you on that one. And I know the Motels soon broke up after the Shock album, and you started a amazing solo career in 1987 with the album Policy, and I hear through the grapevine that you worked with Clarence Clemens and Kenny G on that album?
Clarence Clemens, Kenny G, Charlie Sexton, oh my God, they pulled out. Well, it was kind of one of those situations where it started out being a Motels album. Mm-hmm. And we'd been together a long time. I mean, the Motels were together 8 years and did a lot of albums. I mean, that's a pretty good run for a band. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's longer than the Beatles, I'm not sure. But there came a time when it was just really evident that it was over. There was none of the, people were dragging their asses into the studio. It was kind of like, I'm like, this isn't working. This is, and there'd been reason for that. I mean, there's, throughout the Motel history, there was a lot of times when, you get a producer like Val Garay, and he wants to use all his own guys, and so the guys get shoved aside, and then people, are whispering to me, well, it's all about you. It doesn't have to do with the band, and and I'm like, yeah, be quiet. Well, that's part of the reason I never made it Martha Davis and the Motels. I said, no, this is a band, darn it. This is who we are. But that stuff takes its toll after a while, and I was very precious at that time about the band and being the band and nobody else, and it was evident it wasn't any longer that thing that I that I love so much.
Right.
So the band, it was very sad. One by one, as they dragged into the studio, I would take them across the street to the bar, buy them a drink, and fire them.
Wow.
It was on Valentine's Day, and Michael Goodrow still refers to it as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. But we're still good friends, and it had its life. And the thing that had happened to me throughout my career with Capitol, I think, I was never very... Like I said, I started out being a complete wuss and a complete scaredy cat. Mm-hmm. I got stronger, but I was never one of those people that fought for my convictions, Mm-hmm. Bottom line, I'm just happy if I'm making music. If I'm singing a song, it may not be my favorite genre or whatever, but it makes me happy just to do music. So it's really easy for me to just, be led astray, or not astray. If one producer has a vision and he feels strongly about it, I'll just I won't be the one to fight for my, So it was slipping away what I had originally sort of envisioned as music, which I think was more symbolic on the first album, mm-hmm. which was this sort of it was kind of edgy and quirky and noir and, and it got very polished and poppy and huge and very mainstream. Mm-hmm. And that was never my intention,
Right.
I always liked to just do things that were a little bit more outside, you know.
So Martha, tell me what are you working on today?
Besides the marinade for the barbecue, I have got an album I did a year ago, which is called I Have My Standards, which are a bunch of standard-sounding songs, but I wrote them all, so they can't be standards because no one's ever heard them before. And that is an album that we cut it in 2 days.
Wow.
I got Marty Gerard down to play sax, and I got an upright bass player and a drummer that I'd never worked with. We went in the studio. I'd sent people tapes to listen to and stuff, and Marty did charts for people because I can't read or write.
Right.
I'm lame. That's the curse of the good ear. I always had a good enough ear to pick stuff out. And
I hear you. I'm the same way on drums. I'm the same exact way, yeah.
So we went in and we cut this thing, and it turned out beautifully, but it's basically, I keep hearing it as a sort of a Nelson Riddle-ish, beautiful lush strings, la 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 la. So I'm kind of waiting to see if I can make that happen. So this poor little album sits there going, what are you doing? I've done a kids album. I released 3 new albums in 2007, which I think are I really like them a lot. One is super dark. It's called Beautiful Life, A Beautiful Life, A Slight Miscalculation, which is about my mother and her life. Mm-hmm. Very dark, but almost a concept album in that it should be listened to from front to back.
Right, okay.
If you want a dark journey. And then an album called This, which I wrote with my new band, which is not we realized the other day that there's a couple of members in my quote-unquote new band that have been together longer with me than the actual Motels were ever together.
Wow, really?
So,
that's cool.
And they are great. My band is badass. They are so great.
Nice.
So we wrote it together on This album, which also came out in 2007. And then there was another one called Clean, Modern, and Reasonable, which was me re-envisioning all of the old hits, like Suddenly Last Summer sounds like something from Porgy and Bess. And,
wow, okay.
It's all very, very strange. Take Me Out a Lover sounds like a lounge, but fun.
Cool.
So,
very cool. Very, very cool. And what's the best website, Martha Davis, for fans to get more information on you?
Well, I post everything on my Facebook, and there's a lot of Facebook things. There's pages, and I post on all of them. And I don't like any of this or know what I'm doing half the time. My friend who works on the farm here with me helps me start a web page because I had one, but I didn't like it, and I didn't feel like it connected with me. So now I have this website called themotels.com. But basically, I haven't done anything to it. But people write me there, and I write back to them.
Well, hey, that's what counts. That's what counts.
I think I put up the discography, but I haven't put up... Oh, the other record we should mention, because you mentioned it earlier, was Apocalypso.
Yes.
That got released last year, 30 years to the day.
Really?
When it was supposed to be released. It was released by Omnivore Records, which is a great new label that does amazing... They discover and put out stuff that has never seen the light of day.
Oh, wow.
All the time. They do. Cheryl, my old friend from EMI, who runs it, she has ways of finding treasures. I don't know. She's one of those treasure people. Mm-hmm. And she'll find stuff and put it out. So that came out last year. Beautiful orange vinyl. Can be purchased if you go to the Omnivore store or a CD. And it has outtakes and great... it's a really nice package. So that came out last year. And what else?
I gotta get myself a copy of that. Orange vinyl. I love that stuff.
You need the orange vinyl. I gotta have it.
If you'd like more information on Martha Davis and the Motels, you can go to themotels.com. May 11th, she's going to be up on stage at M15 in Corona. May 17th, she's going to be on the main stage in Ramona in northern San Diego. And May 18th at Lake Arrowhead. For more information, go to themotels.com. Martha Davis of the Motels, thank you so very much for being a part of the experience tonight. I really appreciate it.
JJ, thank you for loving music the way you do.